So the price changing by even something as small as 0.0001 cents can often save the company thousands or even millions of dollars.
目前为止，你觉得这份工作带给你最大的成就感是什么时候？
One of the most satisfying things about being a sourcer is that you can directly see your impact for the company.
这个职位最重要的3个技能是什么？
大家好，欢迎回到我们的频道。今天是职涯我想问系列的第1集。今天我们频道邀请到一位非常特别的来宾，就是我老公行远。
Yeah.
我觉得呢，行远他探索职涯的故事真的非常精彩。像我自己是电子所毕业，我觉得我职涯好像就已经是被人家安排好一般。但是我在行远身上看到的是他探索职涯，从市场分析、外交到大学教授等等，现在居然和我进入到同一个产业。本集影片我们邀请行远跟大家分享他在 IC 大厂从事供应商开发的工作内容。那我们先请行远和大家打声招呼吧。
Yeah, 大家好，我是你们最爱的安行员。As many of you may know, I'm from Kentucky originally, and I lived for many years in Taiwan. And that's where I met my beautiful wife. Yay! And then just last year, both of us moved back to the US to start our careers here. And a few months back, I got a job as a sourcing specialist in San Diego. So now we're here, and we're working in the semiconductor industry.
行远他的求学历程，还有他如何零经验进入半导体产业，之前我们已经有拍过1集跟大家分享了。所以呢，如果你有兴趣的话，可以帮我看一下这支影片。很多人知道呢，其实 IC 设计产业里面有工程师、有 PM、有采购。那 Sourcer 这个职位虽然不像工程师那么耀眼，但它其实是半导体供应链的一个重要角色。能不能先请行远跟我们介绍一下，在 IC 设计公司里面 Sourcing 它负责什么样子的工作内容？
As the name suggests, a sourcing specialist is in charge of sourcing all of the materials needed to create a semiconductor device. We're also in charge of providing internal teams with supplier support and with being the liaison between suppliers and our company. We do all of this for 2 main stages of the production process. One is called NPI, one is called HVM. NPI stands for New Product Initiative, and that's basically where a product is being designed, and this means that everything about the product is still being determined, from the components that will be used in it to the ultimate layout of the design for the semiconductor device. The other stage is high volume manufacturing, or HVM. That's when a product has been finalized and all of the components have been determined and it's ready to be produced at mass production. Sourcing is in charge of working with suppliers and internal engineering teams at both stages of the production process. That means during NPI, we first work with engineering teams to figure out what parts they need to make their chipset. The list of all the materials needed to make a chipset is called the BOM, or the bill of materials. We then search our supplier network to find all the suppliers who can provide each component on the BOM. Then we negotiate with all of the eligible suppliers. We negotiate price, lead time, or the time it takes from the time you purchase a product to that product arriving, shipping terms, and all other important details for purchasing. Once the terms are agreed on, we determine all the suppliers that we will purchase each part from. Then once the BOM is finalized and all the suppliers have been determined, we know the full cost to manufacture each unit of each product. Then the product goes into high volume manufacturing, meaning it is ready to be produced at a large scale and then sold to customers. During this time, if there are any production-related issues with suppliers, we work with them to resolve them.
刚才听完这一串下来，我觉得 Sourcer 他的工作比我想象中的还多。虽然说 Sourcing 它笼统的翻译叫做采购，但是我感觉 Sourcing 跟 Purchasing 是完全不同的领域。你可以跟我们介绍一下这2个领域的差别在哪里吗？
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is something that a lot of people really get confused about. What's the difference between sourcing and procuring or purchasing? And in general, I think these 2 things are very different actually. Purchasing is simply the act of buying something. Just like when you buy something online, you simply go to the website where it's sold, you see what it is, and then you buy it. What makes sourcing different is that we work very closely with engineering teams to determine what parts they need, and then we're in charge of determining the best suppliers for each component that we buy. And we negotiate all of the purchase details with the suppliers. And then we manage the relationship with the suppliers on behalf of our entire company. So sourcing is really much more of a holistic approach to obtaining the components that you need to make a semiconductor device.
其实我一直以来都不是很习惯把 Sourcing 称之为采购，因为我觉得 Sourcing 它不像 像大家普遍的刻板印象那样，采购就是负责买东西这么简单而已。听起来更像是你需要去寻求供应商啦，跟供应商建立长期的良好合作关系，帮助公司进行决策。我知道在半导体公司里面，采购其实分很多种不同的类型，像是晶圆制造、材料、元件等等。那 sourcing 在产业里面大致上可以分成哪一些类别呢？
I think sourcing in the semiconductor industry can be very, very complicated, just like the industry itself. What kind of sourcing structure a company has and what kind of products it sources largely depends on what type of semiconductor company it is. For example, all types of companies in the industry, whether they're fabless design companies, foundries, OSATs, IDMs, equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, all of them have sourcing teams who purchase what they need to build their products. For example, if you work at a foundry, your job is to source everything needed to make the advanced computer chips, like raw materials like silicon, or chemicals, metals, machinery, and many other manufacturing related items. But as everyone has learned from our semiconductor industry structure video, in the industry, the fabless design companies are the ones who manage and oversee the entire chipset production process. So sourcing at a chip design company is a lot more interesting, because you get to work with suppliers from all parts of the entire industry and across the entire production process. At a fabless chip design company, sourcing is generally separated into teams who are responsible for buying everything necessary to make a chipset from the design to the final production. These teams are generally separated into these types. Number one is foundry. The foundry sourcing team is generally responsible for working with the foundries who manufacture the advanced chips. So the foundries like TSMC and Samsung are their main suppliers. Another team is the memory sourcing team. Their job is to source the memory chips needed in a chipset. So they work with the main memory chip suppliers like Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix to source the memory chips needed for a semiconductor device. Another team that's really important is the passive component sourcing team. This team is responsible for sourcing everything that's not a chip in the chipset. Basically, they buy inductors, capacitors, PCB, wiring, all of the stuff that's needed to make a semiconductor device, except for the advanced chips and the memory chips. And the final team is OSAT sourcing. OSAT sourcing's job is to work with the OSATs to reserve production capacity to assemble and test the fabless chip design company's finished chips. So all of these different sourcing teams work together to make sure that everything that the company needs to build their final chipset is purchased.
那我们现在看到这张图，其实是整个半导体产业从研发、设计、材料到设备，甚至是晶圆制造、封装测试，一直到整个成品完成的完整流程。在这个流程里面 ，sourcing 它主要会负责参与哪几个阶段呢？在不同阶段，你们会做什么样子的事情？
So there are sourcing teams responsible for sourcing everything at all levels of the production process. In this chart, for example, at a chip design company, there will be a sourcing team in charge of sourcing EDA and IP for the design company. At a foundry, there will be a team in charge of sourcing the materials and the equipment for the fabs. And then at a fabless chip design company, there's a team that's responsible for sourcing the OSAT services. At the end product manufacturer, there's a team who's in charge of actually sourcing the fabless chip company to design their chip that they use in their finished product. So each type of company at all stages of the entire production process has sourcing teams, and the products that they actually source can be as different as silicon, raw material that goes into a chip, and finished chipsets from a fabless chip design company.
像我自己其实是工程师嘛，我主要是专注在设计那一段。我常常就是完成一个专案之后，就马上投入到下一个专案。有时候是等到产品发表会之后，我看到那个成品在舞台上出现，才想到说，哎，这是我去年完成的专案哎。
Yeah, magic, right?
Magic 就觉得产品好像是直接从石头蹦出来这样。其实一个产品它能够顺利发表，背后其实有一个采购团队在帮忙，跟供应商谈判、控管物料、处理物流，然后确保产线可以顺利开跑。刚才听到你提的，其实是一个比较大方向的工作范围。回到实际面，你们每天的工作内容大概包含哪些呢？
It's a very good question because everybody wants to know what you actually do on the day-to-day, what the actual job is. And I would say most days, we spend a lot of time coordinating with internal teams. We have meetings with engineering teams when they need us to source a new item. We provide pricing information to buyers who actually write the purchasing orders to complete the purchases for the products that we negotiate. We work with suppliers and internal supply chain teams to resolve any supply or service issues. We coordinate with other sourcing teams, and we research all of the components that we buy so that we are prepared when we have to go into negotiations with the suppliers. And I would say really the biggest thing is just about managing a lot of data. We collect data at all stages of the process, all of the different kinds of components that we have to buy from suppliers. There's thousands of different types of components components, all with different kinds of specifications and technical differences like size and performance values. We actually build dozens of different kinds of chipsets for different kinds of applications, and we have to manage all of this data.
你刚才其实还少讲了一个部分啊，就是你们常常会跟供应餐去聚餐、应酬、吃好料的这个部分，你没有讲。那其实像工程师在看产品呀，通常直觉都会想要选效能最好的。但是如果以一个 sourcer 的角度来讲，通常你在做供应商评估的时候，除了性能以外，你们还要考虑到什么样子的面向？
First and foremost, the most important thing that we have to do is we have to get a product that meets the specifications of the engineers. Once we've met that requirement, by far the most important thing after that is price. And that's especially true for sourcing in the semiconductor industry because we buy millions or hundreds of millions of the same components from these suppliers. So the price changing by even something as small as 0.0001 cents can often save the company thousands or even millions of dollars. But we also consider many other factors like lead time, product quality, supplier performance, and we also have to consider many types of risks, including supply chain risks, bottleneck risks, single sourcing risk, and geopolitical risk.
听起来 sourcer 最大的工作内容其实也包含了砍价的部分。那我蛮好奇的是 sourcing 需要懂技术吗？那他需要懂到什么样子的程度？
And I would say absolutely, and especially if you want to move up in the role, because the higher you go in the hierarchy of sourcing, the more you need to understand about the technical specifications of all the products that we buy. And you need to not only understand the technical specifications of the products you buy, but also the technology that your company creates using the products that you buy. Because you have to work with engineering teams who explain all the technical specifications of the parts that they need. Then you have to do research on where that part can be purchased, and then you have to understand the relationship between that part's technical specifications and its price. And then ultimately, when you're negotiating with the suppliers, you need to understand the products so you know how to negotiate for it. And that's really hard in a fabless sourcing role because many fabless semiconductor companies design chipsets for dozens of different end applications like AI, PC, mobile devices, RF devices, data center, XR devices, cars, and so many others. And you're buying many different types of components. And each of the components has dozens of different design specifications like value, tolerance, temperature rating, quality, size, all of these different aspects that you have to consider. And at the same time, you're negotiating for those components with dozens or even hundreds of different suppliers. But I would say, in general, that's the difference between this job and many engineering jobs is engineers have to have an expert, deep understanding of the one specific area that they are expert in. For example, if you work on the XR team as a design engineer, you might specialize in power for a chip that goes in XR devices. So your area of expertise is not only within XR, but a smaller portion of the entire design process. So it's very, very specific. But those engineers have such a deep knowledge of all of the details for that specific role. Whereas a sourcer, we're responsible for buying our components for every single device that our company makes. So we need to have a rudimentary understanding of everything. We need to understand AI devices, IoT devices, data center devices, everything, and then also all the different parts of each device, like the PCB, the substrate, passive components, the advanced chips. We need to understand how all of that works together. So to be a sourcer, you really have to have a very, very broad understanding of the entire industry.
我有时候会觉得，明明行员他才刚进入到产业这个没多久，但我感觉他怎么懂得比我还多，懂得比我还广。想要当一个好采购，你其实需要涉猎各种不同领域的知识。那刚才我们聊到的是技术层面，接下来就进入到另外一个非常非常有趣且关键的阶段——商业谈判。我蛮好奇，在半导体产业里面的采购谈判，通常要谈些什么？
And I think that's the part of the job that interests people the most, and it's also the part that I enjoy the most.
You really enjoy it?
I love it. So in general, negotiations occur either biannually or annually, and they negotiate for the next upcoming entire period. For example, if you're negotiating at the end of one year, you're negotiating for the next half of the next year or the entire next year. What happens is, at these negotiations, is the purchasing company will have a list of all of the products that they buy from that specific supplier, which includes the amount that they buy, the technical specifications of each product, the current price that they pay, and their target future price. Each side will do their research and try to either maximize the price if they're the seller or minimize the price if they're the buyer. So the purchasing company first presents their target price, which is the best price that they want to pay for their future purchases for the next period. Then the seller always comes back and says the exact same thing. No, that price is way too low. We can't sell that product that low. And then they list a bunch of reasons why they can't afford to sell that product at that low or why they think that's not a good target price. Then they present another price, which is almost always quite a bit higher than the original price that the buyer presented. Then the buyer always says the exact same thing in response. Oh my God, that price is way too high. We cannot pay that much for this. And then they go back and forth like this, presenting the reasons why they think their price should be continually adjusted. And they do that for every single product until a specific price is met for each one. And then they use that list of all the products that they're going to buy, and that's the price that they'll pay for the entire next period for every product.
我觉得谈判这件事情真的是很难拿捏，有的时候供应商要跟你们谈价格，你们关系不能太近，但是也不能太僵，而且有时候供应商会想要从你这边多打听到一些资讯，像我这种讲话比较直的人，我可能就会不小心说太多，然后就完蛋了。在谈判的时候要怎么样拿捏好分寸？
I think negotiations are pretty much the same regardless of the situation or the industry or anything. Negotiations are all about position and leverage. Position means the role that you play in the negotiations. For example, whether you're the buyer or the seller. And leverage means how many other options you have. If you're the buyer, that's how many other suppliers can give you that product. If you're the seller, that's how many other buyers can you sell that product to. So generally, the seller has to be deferential to the buyer. So the buyer has a lot more power to act aggressively in the negotiations because the seller wants to keep their customer happy. But leverage is ultimately what determines the supplier or buyer's willingness to change their price. If there are many sellers of the same product, then the buyer has a lot of leverage. In this case, usually the buyer will present a price and say, if you don't meet our target price, we're going to go to your competitors and give them the chance to meet the price. So the seller basically has to make a decision. They can either accept the very low target price or they can reject the price and risk possibly losing their business to their competitors. So in this situation, the buyer has maximum leverage. But the opposite situation can also occur, which is where there's only one seller of a product. That means the seller has maximum leverage because the buyer has no other option but to buy the product that the seller is selling at the seller's preferred price. That's why one of the most important things that a sourcer can do is always maintain options. You never want to be in a situation where you're completely 100% reliant on one single company for one product.
刚才听起来，我觉得采购这个角色很有趣的地方是，你需要跟你很多不同的女朋友保持好的关系。可能最近跟这个女朋友好，然后接下来她不接受我的价格，对我不够好，再换一个。
Yeah, if you have maximum leverage, that's not a bad place to be, right?
对，这就是为什么我觉得采购这个角色有趣的地方，它其实结合了技术跟商业思维。你既要了解产品的技术细节，又需要具备谈判策略，去争取最合理的价格跟合作条件。那你是怎么样去培养这两个面向的能力？
For the technical aspects, I love to read and study.
没听
I love it so much. So I just read books on all of these technical topics, and then I make flashcards to memorize all the technical details of everything I need to know to be good at my job. And I really, really enjoy that part.
没看过这么爱读书的。
Yeah, I love it. And then the negotiation and business skills for me are something that come very naturally. Yeah.
Businessman.
I really love communicating with people and coordinating projects at a big picture level. And so for me, the strategic aspect of negotiating with suppliers and working with engineers to plan our products is something that I'm really good at and I really, really enjoy.
所以其实 sourcing 它这个角色更像是从技术去说服，然后你再去用谈判的方式创造双赢的角色。目前为止，你觉得这份工作带给你最大的成就感是什么时候？
For one, I feel like this job has really helped me get a really solid big picture understanding of the semiconductor industry. I get to learn about all the technology that my company makes across all its applications like AI, PC, mobile, auto, everything. And I also get to learn about all of the suppliers suppliers throughout the entire industry and what products they sell. And now I feel like I have a really strong understanding of how engineering and business teams work together to create semiconductors. And number two is I've learned how to communicate and negotiate, which I think are skills that are really helpful in all aspects of life.
我刚才以为你要说你觉得最有成就感的时候是杀价成功的时候。
I think that's a really, really good point actually, because one of the most satisfying things about being a sourcer is that you can directly see your impact for the company. If I negotiate really well on a product, I can see the exact savings I have for the company. I save the company this many thousands of dollars, this many millions of dollars. It's really, really exciting feeling to be able to do that for the company and then to directly show them, hey, this is what I'm worth.
你会不会觉得，我帮公司省的钱怎么比我薪水多了这么多倍？
Always.
那我们回到正题哦，你觉得 sourcing 这个职位最重要的3个技能是什么？
I think the number one by far is data management. And this may surprise a lot of people, but this skill is necessary for basically all modern jobs, whether you're a business or engineering person, because the amount of data is just so huge. And specifically for a sourcer, in the semiconductor industry, we have to manage so much data. We have to not only manage all the data for all the potential products that we might buy from all the different suppliers, all the different specifications for each one of those products, we also have to manage all of the projects that our company's working on across all of the different device types, AI, IoT, mobile, everything. And we have to also manage relationships with dozens of different suppliers and manage all the pricing information for all the prices we negotiate, and at the same time try to create target prices by using all of the data that we have available.
跟女朋友保持好关系。
You have to manage so much data, it's just crazy. So data management skills are essential for this job. And number two is communication and negotiation skills. As we mentioned, this job is very much a liaison between so many different groups. So you have to be a really, really good communicator. You need to understand how to talk differently to different groups based on their technical understanding and their knowledge base. And in addition to that, as we mentioned, one of the most important parts of the job is doing the actual negotiation. So you have to have the skill to be able to separate your personal relationships with the suppliers, to focus in and to be able to negotiate as an effective negotiator on behalf of the company. And then number three are technical knowledge. Like we mentioned before, you do have to have at least a basic understanding of all the products that you could buy and all of the products that your company creates using the products you buy.
我记得其实之前有观众在影片底下留言问我们，当一个好的采购，他到底需要具备什么样子能力？是比较偏重谈判策略、协商技巧，还是其实他很重数据分析的能力？刚才听完你这样一讲，我觉得真的是都很重要。那如果说今天我们有观众他想要进入到采购或者是半导体供应链这个领域，你会给他什么样子的建议？
Yeah, I think that's the perfect question to end this interview with. And my advice would be, find an industry or a product that really, really interests you and learn everything you can about that product and pretend to yourself that it's really, really fun and it's a personal challenge to learn as much as you can about that product. Because essentially you want to make yourself the world's expert in sourcing that product. The more you learn, the more it's going to help, the more enjoyable it's going to make the entire process. And then everything else that you need, all the other skills that you need, can build from there. You'll learn how to better manage data, how to negotiate, and how to work with engineers after that. But it all starts with a passion for the product that you source.
好啦，影片的最后真的非常感谢行远今天为我们带来这么精彩的分享。其实我自己也学到很多，我学到很多在这个产业里面更宏观的思维。那如果你喜欢本集的职涯，我想问，记得按赞、订阅，然后在底下留言本集你最有收获的内容。我们下次见喽，拜拜，
拜拜。